Hello, welcome to Mod Midwives, a Metro Midwifery podcast. I'm Gina Gerba.
And I'm Nedra Hale, and we are home birth midwives serving the Denver metro area.
Well, we are starting the second installment of our Phases of Labor podcast. So today we're going to talk about the second stage.
Yeah.
I always laugh because you and I talk about the second stage of labor completely differently. We have completely different feelings about this.
I'm curious to know what you're referring to, because it's pretty...
personal experience.
Pretty straightforward. Oh, you mean like how we personally experience the second stage?
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
So the second stage of labor is pushing, for those that are not familiar with the term. It's that from complete dilation to pushing the baby out. So the birth of the baby is the second stage. So why don't you talk about what you think about the second stage, and then I'll talk about what I think about the second stage.
Personal experience standpoint. So with my first baby, who was very hard to push out, well, since I've seen some really hard pushing stages, since then, I would say it wasn't as hard as some that I've seen, but it did take a couple of hours. She was posterior. In that labor, it was a relief to push, which you hear sometimes a lot of people say it's a relief to push. I felt like it was so much better than the first stage. I could be productive, and I was also so tired because by the time I started pushing, it was 3:30 in the morning or something, and so then I slept through it and then woke up to push, and that was nice. It was just such a relief.
Doze off and then a new contraction and then you push and then doze off and push.
Side, and then I'd be sleep in between, and then time to push, and then go back to sleep.
Yeah.
So that was, comparatively great, even though it was hard work. But my other three babies, I hated pushing. I hated it. It went super fast, and I actually, when I do self-analysis, I wonder if it's because it went so fast that I hated it, because it was just overwhelming. And so I was I would fight it and be no,
It's funny, I see people, so I'll say I love pushing. I love it so much. I also have really fast pushing stages, so I don't think fast is enough of the answer. But I do think it's so full of sensations. I could actually feel, my second son in particular, I could actually feel his rotation through the pelvis. It was it just, I could feel him go down step by step as he rotated through. So it is a lot of sensation. So I can see how if that happens quickly, you don't have time to adapt to the sensations. But I have a theory. My theory is this: that people that are better at surrendering like the first stage of labor more, and people that are better at doing like the second stage of labor more. It is my theory.
Interesting.
And I mean, it's true for us. It's true for our personalities, that you are a little more kind of able to let things happen. And I'm a little more of a make it happen kind of person. I don't know.
It might be true.
I love to push. I had an epidural with my first baby, and I still felt the urge to push. And it was not just a relief, but it just almost felt good to be moving the baby. And I pushed, I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at the videos for sure, but I think I pushed with him for 25, 30 minutes with an epidural on my first baby.
Oh my gosh.
So not very long. The other two were 5, 10 minutes. I don't know, really short.
Yeah. I even think I think my fourth baby was short like that, just a few pushes, but I think the two in between weren't that short. They were 20 minutes, 30 minutes, instead of super fast. And of course my second baby was humongous. He had a humongous head, so that factors in there too, I'm sure.
I specifically remember pushing through 2 contractions with my third baby. I don't remember how many contractions I pushed with my second. I think it might have been 1. It might have been 1 or 2. I was on the birth stool with my second, so it was fast. I also have a giant pelvis, like giant. And so I do think that pelvis shape probably has something to do with how pushing feels to people.
Probably.
So I'm sure I have a giant outlet. What can I say? Anyway, so I'm sure that pelvis plays a role. You know, we talk about the 4 P's, the power, which is the contractions, the passenger, which is the baby and how the baby's lined up, the pelvis, and then the psyche. So we've already talked about psyche. We talked about psyche and power in the first podcast, but this time we're talking about what position is that baby in as they navigate the bony pelvis. So yeah,
Yes.
so I love the second stage. So in the second stage, you know, what are some things that maybe we should actually, why don't we back up and talk about internal rotation or the cardinal movements of the baby. Do you want to talk about it or do you want me to?
I would say you.
Okay.
Yes, because I don't know, that might be too much for my brain.
Well, you know what? I have my pelvis here. I'm going to reach over. I do.
Okay.
Since we're on YouTube for this podcast, I'm going to grab my pelvis and then I can kind of show a little bit, although my tailbone has sadly broken off of my pelvis here. But just to give you an idea, I'm gonna get rid of my hairband here. So in the pelvis, like this, there's this point where these bony tuberosities stick out. Those are the ischial spines. You can see it there in front of my glasses.
If you're British, it's ischial spine.
Ischial. Oh, what do you say? Do you say ischial or ischial?
Ischial? Which is odd because I say a lot of the British.
Yeah, you do. So I wasn't sure.
I say ischial.
So anything above the ischial spines is considered the pelvic inlet. And then anything below the ischial spines is considered the pelvic outlet. And what's interesting about the pelvis, and this is a typical gynecoid shaped pelvis, there's different shapes, we won't get into that. In the inlet, the part above the ischial spines, there's more space from front to back than there is to side. So the baby has to enter the pelvis with the back, hopefully, with the back straight at the birthing person's back so that their head is going in this way. No, I have that backwards. I'm sorry. I got confused on the camera. It's wider from here to here. As soon as I looked at it that way, I was like, oh, wait a minute. So it's wider from here to here at the inlet. And then as you turn at the outlet, it's front to back.
Right,
wider.
so they kind of enter it a little wonky.
Yeah, so they go in kind of sideways into the inlet. As they descend, in order to get past those tuberosities, they have to turn and line straight up at what we say 0 station at the ischial spines, and then they are able to descend through the widest part of the pelvis front to back at that point at the outlet. And my tailbone is missing here, but the tailbone has mobility and flexibility, and so the tailbone kind of moves out so they have more space front to back to get out. And so what happens is the baby comes into the pelvis kind of sideways, and then they rotate hopefully anteriorly, so this is their back, and then their head is delivered, and then their shoulders have to navigate the pelvis. So now their shoulders in the inlet are lateral, they're side to side, and then in order to navigate the mid pelvis and the outlet, they have to rotate themselves and come out
right
from an anterior posterior position. So so their head is born, then their head turns at the outside of the body so that their shoulders can be delivered front to back, and then the rest of the baby is born. So so delivering the head is the first big step, and delivering the shoulders is the second big step. So it's a lot. That's a lot to happen in, sometimes a few minutes. It's a lot of motion and movement.
Right, or all of this can take a really long time.
Yes, it can take, especially with a first baby, 2 or even more hours to get that baby through the pelvis. And I always talk about the 2 steps forward, 1 step back phenomenon. How do you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, you know me, I tend to like use my hands for everything. So I'm always like, we're doing like
you're making sound effects and visual.
Yes.
Yeah, but like the baby comes down and then they recede and then
Yeah,
they
it
come
just
down and then they recede and they just go back and forth, and it helps those tissues stretch and it helps your bony pelvis stretch too.
Yeah.
The pelvis is amazing.
Yes.
It has all of these joints in it that you don't even know exist, but we have these joints here by the sacrum. We have the pubic symphysis, which has some space in it. And so what happens is that the relaxin from pregnancy that makes everything kind of loosey-goosey in pregnancy gives you more mobility in your pelvis. There's also things you can do to give your pelvis more mobility and more space in labor. What do you like people to do?
Position changes are great. So when we were talking about all the doing the stairs and stuff in active labor, that's, we're getting even in that stage of labor, the baby is navigating the top part of the pelvis. So, we're just making room, making space for the head to get down in there. And then during pushing, the same thing can happen. Like we're probably not doing stairs, but we're changing positions. If we're pushing for a long time, for sure, we're going to be squatting, standing, hands and knees, side to side, seeing which positions help the pelvis to open more. And different positions are better for different places for the head to be in the pelvis, so so we try all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and for somebody who's had kind of a longer labor, the thing about the second stage of labor is that it's a lot of active work. This is the most athletic part of what you're going to do in labor. And that is why you need to rest in early labor. That is why you need to not use up all your reserves in early labor, and also why you need to make sure that you're eating and drinking and keeping your your blood sugar up and your hydration good, and all of that needs to be happening early on because you're preparing for this. Like, in a way, first stage is training for the event of second stage.
That's good.
In a way. It's not exactly, but whatever. It's a flawed metaphor. Anyway, there's a lot of work involved in the second stage a lot of the time. So yeah, position changes are great. Asymmetrical positions are great. So being on your knees and then moving one leg forward into like a runner's lunge is a great position. Squatting is not asymmetric, but it could be. There's lots of stuff you can do. One great thing about water is that I'm not again, I don't feel like where the baby comes out is that important, but one great thing about water is you can usually adopt a lot more challenging positions in the water than you can on land.
That's true.
So it's possible to squat in the water a lot longer. It's possible to do these lungy things in the water a lot longer. So having that available is a great tool.
That's true.
Speaking of squatting, this is really good pregnancy preparation to do lots and lots of squats all the time. Forget the Kegels, do the squats, build your squat muscles. It will build the right muscles to support labor and birth more than Kegels will.
Squatting is something we should be doing our whole lives.
Yeah. And we Americans do not. We sit upright, everything
squat.
we do.
I squat all the time now, although my my Achilles tendons are still tight. I mean, we have such tight Achilles tendons, like, because we don't squat, but I squat every single day. I squat for everything whenever I'm getting down. And I think it's just really, oh my gosh, our pelvic floors as Americans are just
a disaster.
Really abused.
We have a whole field. We have a whole field to help deal with that. So yeah. So you mentioned you could doze off to sleep in between contractions. I would never have been able to do that, but I didn't have the long pushing stage either.
I mean, I think it's just the circumstances. It was just, I had been up all night.
You were so tired.
Yeah.
So hard.
I've certainly seen several people that did the same thing. Like,
oh, me too. I've seen it. It's just, it would have been not something that I don't know. I don't know. I have a hard time just.
We're like let's get this done.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, when I pushed my first baby because she was posterior, it actually did not feel productive. It felt like it's just like a brick wall, like it's, so you could, like, the like 1 millimeter of movement at a time thing was like literal.
That was true for you.
Yes.
Yeah, we should mention the reason a posterior baby is so much harder to push out is because you've got this bony part of their head with the bony part of the sacrum. And, you know, the back of their head is at the sacrum, and it's just, it hurts so much more, and it doesn't fit as well. There's not as much flexibility. So if their little squishy faces get squished up against the sacrum, that's better because they get through, you know, they fit better. It's like it's a lock and a key, you know, that, and a posterior baby is like trying to jam that key in the wrong position.
It just doesn't fit right. And for most people, it takes a really long time to push those babies out, or they have to get turned, which, you know, eventually my baby did have to get turned, like right at the end. And then I pushed her right out, and I'm like, why did you not do this like 2 hours ago, people?
And you know, it was probably a lot harder to turn at that point than it would have been previously.
Yeah, I mean, because he did that manual rotation thing, and
oh my gosh,
I was like, thank you, because
could have done that a while ago. Yeah, that is unfortunate. Sorry about that. Yeah, my pushing always feels productive, so maybe that's another part of why I don't have that thing, you know. But even with the epidural, I remember saying, you know, I need to push, and she's like, oh honey, we just checked you. Yeah, they're like, no, we just checked you and you're not even close. And I was like, no, I have to push. And so the nurse came in and she's like, oh, give me a push. And I gave a push. She's like, stop, let me go get the doctor. So she, like, you know, so it was definitely like one push. I got him probably almost to the perineum.
Oh my gosh.
I know, like it must have been, you know, now that I know what that looks like on the other end of the spectrum, I probably got him at least to +3, possibly more.
I'm so amused when, I mean, we all know as practitioners that that's not usually what happens. It usually takes all this effort to push out a first baby. But I mean, even in the several hundred births that we've seen, I've seen that at least a few times, enough to know that it happens.
Yeah.
And these people see like thousands of births. Like,
I know.
Why
way more than we see.
Like, why do they not think that this could happen? And that they never do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. It's so weird. Mm-hmm. But they do, and they did, and then I had a baby. So, yeah. So for the midwife, again, we're right there. This is sort of like, you know, the advice for the midwife is the advice for transition. Is just, we're there, we're doing a lot of coaching. Occasionally people need a little help. Occasionally they really want to push and nothing's really happening. It's a really good idea to check and make sure that they're not pushing into a cervical lip that's getting swollen. That can happen. It happens very often with first babies because those babies are so low and they feel so much pressure, but it's not quite the productive pushing. Mm-hmm. It happens a lot with multips too, in that the cervix was just, that baby's coming faster than the cervix, totally dilated, and it can get,
it kind of like drags the cervix.
Yeah, comes down with the baby's head. And I know that there's a school of thought that you just leave lips alone, but I am not a member of that school.
No, me neither.
I mean, you can cause a lot of problems. In the primip, you can cause a swollen cervix that impedes progress. In the multip, you can have a prolapse. You can have a serious prolapse issue.
Or a tear. I mean, I've had
cervical tear.
I mean, I've had clients that I cared for who had a cervical tear from a previous birth. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's, that's a
big deal.
We don't want to damage this tissue. And so I think it's totally okay, particularly with a multip, to go with how you feel. Like, okay, I feel like pushing, let's give it some test pushes.
Sure.
But if there's not progress, you definitely should check, because you don't want to be pinching that cervix.
Yeah. And that's exactly my thing too. It's like, sure, this is expected. I would expect you to feel like you want to push now. Yeah. I also expect a baby to come out soon. Right. Or to be visible. And so if you're doing something and there's not a baby coming out, then I'm like, what's going on?
Right.
And even in the primate, first time birthing person, I feel like it's fine. You know, if they feel that urge to push, give it a little bit, let them go with it. But if we don't see a change, it is cause for concern. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That, you know, that's a practice style, but I know that for me, I know a lot of people who transferred with a lip that possibly could have been managed and reduced. It's also fine if you feel pushy, but not really like you're getting productive pushing, to not push, even if you feel a little pushy. So if you're not sure, I'm not sure if I need to be pushing or not, I kind of feel like it, I am like, let's just wait then. Don't start pushing down. Rarely, but sometimes we do need to coach with some more directed pushing. But I would say that's the exception to the rule, where we're needing to kind of, you know, come on, you can do it. Let's put, you know, but sometimes we do need it. Sometimes we need to see progress because we do have a little bit of a timeline we need to be looking for.
And it's not just that, it's like sometimes I mean, I had a really difficult primate birth over the summer, and you did too. It was like the same week, I think.
It was like within 2 days of each other.
But, you know, the birthing person is exhausted. Everybody's exhausted.
Yeah.
It's probably been the whole night long. It's, you know, so there is this sweet spot where you want to get the baby out before the body is too exhausted to get the baby out.
Yeah. Because
and
transferring to the
is tough. That's a long time.
It is a long time if you're working hard.
Yeah.
And the, you know, I actually just posted something on the Instagram story, which was like, it's a quote from one of the farm midwives, which is like, it's a great skill to, or no, it's easy to be a hands-off midwife. The trick is knowing when to be a hands-on midwife, because there is that sweet spot of needing to kind of intervene before you lose the curve of production.
Right, exactly.
Or productivity, I guess I would say. Good. All right. So then the baby is starting to be visible. Usually we see a little bit of head, you know, the labia kind of part, we see a little bit of head, a little retraction, a little bit of head, a little retraction, and that kind of keeps going. Sometimes the dads are really excited. They're like, the baby's crowning, because they can see head. But we're a ways from a crown at that point usually.
Yeah.
Not to burst their bubble, but the crowning is the part where the whitest part of the head is outside. So it's quite a lot of head is out.
And it is bigger than you think it is going to be.
Yes, it's the point where the baby's definitely more out than in.
Yeah.
Or the baby's head is more out than in.
Mm-hmm.
But we really encourage people to just take it really slow, have some nice deep breaths. We believe in protecting the tissues physically. We believe in hands on the perineum, so we're, you know, usually providing perineal support, sometimes hot compresses, sometimes oil. It sort of just depends on what's going on and if we're in or out of the water. But we want you to do that. We don't want you to blast the baby out at that point, because you definitely increase the risk of tearing. So we're usually doing a lot of coaching through that, like, take a deep breath. Okay, little tiny pushes, you know, we'll give lots of feedback at that point. And then the baby's born. You know, they go through that rotation and head and shoulders and baby, and then baby's born, and we place the baby, unless the birthing person, you know, receives their own baby, we usually place the baby on the mother's abdomen at that point. Is there anything in the second stage that you want to say that we...
Well, I was thinking that we forgot to talk about how the muscles work during second stage, way at the beginning. So it's really related at this point, but you know, so in first stage, the muscles are working to open the cervix. So they're kind of like pulling. And in the second stage, they're like they're pistoning the baby out. And the baby also is doing stuff to get out. So not just the cardinal movements, you know, they're working with their feet to like kick off the top of the uterus.
And that's actually something people are surprised about. They're like, this baby won't stop moving, and the baby pushing, and it hurts so much. And it's like, oh yeah, well, they're active members of this process. And I think we don't think about that. We think that we're just pushing the baby out, but really the baby is assisting in their delivery. Yeah, that's great. That's a great thing to mention. And sorry, I got slightly distracted for 1 second. Did you say that the fundus builds at some point, the muscle fibers of the fundus?
No, you have a great way of describing that. So say it.
Oh, I don't know if I do. So as we've got this turtle in first stage of labor, we've got the turtleneck opening, and then those fibers are like crunching up, and then they're like gathering at the top of the fundus, and then that big ball of muscle at the top of the fundus is pushing the baby down in the second stage. So again, these muscles are all doing different things.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that's about it for the second stage then. Let's be sure that you join us next week for the third stage of labor. That one will be pretty short, but it is very important. It's, you know, it's a big deal.
Yes.
Everything's kind of a big deal in labor, by the way. Okay, follow us at Metro Midwifery on all of the things, or check us out at our regular website, www.metromidwifery.com, or our podcast page, modmidwives.com. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.